Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Brown Bags and Bibles. I'm Scott, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, joined as always by
Mark Liebert, Scott's partner for Brown Bags, Bibles, and Books, and an elder here at First Christian Church.
Indeed, and we are in week 3, episode 3 of C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and we are in book 2.
Book 2.
What Christians Believe.
Yes.
And we begin, just as a quick little recap, the entire first book is building an argument, the moral argument, for God being the God who is alone able to make up for humanity breaking all the laws we know we shouldn't.
Right.
And I tried to say that a specific way because our awareness of right and wrong isn't generic awareness of right and wrong by itself. It makes itself known to us. We learn it by doing good and right things and seeing them, work rightly at some level, sure, but not as we know they should, which is not as good as we. So we'll get into privation of evil stuff later, but that's a version of that he begins to get to. So we know it from the good stuff, yes, but it's not as good as it should be.
Right.
And more than anything, we experience the failure of this side.
Yeah.
We experience the lack of all that. So that's all an argument for the moral law, and we ended basically with the gospel in saying that only a God of the Bible explains the moral law that is within all humans.
Yeah, and by the moral law, easiest way to think of that is basically the Ten Commandments. It's the simplest way to understand it.
Yep.
And by the way, every single person that's ever lived has broken all 10.
Yes, I'm glad you added that. That is a big deal.
You're going to say, I've never committed adultery. Jesus said, if you've looked at a woman lustfully in your heart, you've committed adultery.
Right, and lust has a pretty broad definition.
It is. You have never looked at someone and thought improperly toward them?
Right.
Never?
Not one person ever. You're a liar, which means you've also broken another one. So we're 0 for 2 there.
You've never murdered. Jesus said if you speak to your brother and call him a fool in anger.
I've never missed the Sabbath.
You have murdered him in your heart. Every single one of us has broken all 10.
Yes.
Jesus took the 10 literal commandments and he took it to the heart.
Yes.
You have heard it said, but I say to you.
Yes.
And it went to the motives and the attitudes and the intentions of the heart. Every one of us has broken all 10.
Yes, by which he did not undo the 10.
No.
He just reinforced them.
That's right.
Right. Enough of
That's right.
all that.
So chapter 1 is beginning of what Christians believe rival conceptions of God. So we're going to talk about the different ideas of what this God is like.
Yes. I like that he starts here by saying, even if you're a Christian, you don't have to believe that all other ways of describing faith, spiritual experience, and religion, you don't have to believe that all of those are flat out wrong.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
He says, where Christianity and another religion disagree, here then is where you side with Christianity. But he begins by saying the vast majority of people today and throughout history have always believed in God of some kind. Some believe that God is beyond good and evil. That's what pantheism is.
Yes.
Others maintain God strongly differentiates between good and evil. And that would be more like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, etc.
Yes. And to be a Christian and to believe there is some explanatory truth in another system is not to be a pluralist in the modern sense of it flattens all out and they're all the same.
No.
It's not to believe that. It's not to say, we coexist. It's simply to say the truth of another system gets its truth from who God is and how he made the world.
Comes from the common source.
Yes.
Yes, right.
They may call it something else and be wrong about some other things for sure, but
So he talks about this pantheism idea a little bit. I know here in America we may not be as familiar with this idea, but one of the problems he says with pantheism is that God is everything. Well, if God is everything, there's the pan, the everything.
Right. And it's not
Theism.
just that God is in.
No, not that he's in.
Right, but is.
He is.
Yeah.
He is
This is
everything.
not panentheism. This is pantheism.
Yeah. If truly, if God is everything, if I am God, you are God, we are God, collectively everything is God, then
Right.
nothing can really be against his will or be wrong
Right.
because it's everything.
It ends up being there is no good, there is no evil.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And no one. Well, let's just move on. Yeah.
And to distinguish, Christianity, however, definitely believes some things are evil, some things are contrary to God's will. God isn't just everything. There is right, there is wrong. There is God, the creator. There is the creation. That's a difference than everything is God.
And as we've been saying about the moral law, that's closer to our experience and understanding of how the world actually works.
Right. And then he talks a little bit about when he was an atheist. We said that in the last episode. He actually began by believing there was no God. And his main argument when he was an atheist was because the universe is unjust, therefore there cannot be a God. The universe,
Very common thing
Sure.
that people would say.
Look at all the evil
Sure.
in the world. The universe is unjust, therefore God cannot exist. At least not a good, all-powerful God.
But hold on.
Right.
Where do you get the idea of just and unjust?
Yeah. He says, because I thought the world was cruel, senseless, and unjust, God could not exist. But hang on, this argument depends on two things. First of all, that the world truly is bad. Not just that I feel it's bad, but it actually is bad by some kind of standard.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Where does the standard come from? Where does the sense of injustice come from?
Yeah. Well, it has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And obviously we're saying that Lewis is saying that's from God.
Yeah.
And how can it come from non-God?
Right. He says if a real standard for justice doesn't exist, then what am I arguing about?
Right. Yes.
I need
exactly.
to just shut up.
Yes.
There's no standard.
Right.
So what does it matter?
I think that what modern atheists don't freely admit, as they should, is that the actual consequence of what they believe
Right.
is that they don't believe any actual just and unjust.
Right.
They're actually straight up materialists.
Right. That's where this goes.
Yes.
If you're going to be consistent in your logic and understanding, then there is no right and wrong, which is total chaos, and no one lives that way.
Right. And that's where you have to end up.
Right.
Which is no one actually functions that way.
You can't.
Which means that the witness of all humanity's experience for all time has said, what you say about being an atheist, you don't actually believe yourself.
No, you can't live that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And that you don't should occur to you.
Right.
Even as you make arguments for, we have good reasons for humanity care about the flourishing of others. Do you? And from where does it rise? And does it come from? Were you taught that? Where to come from?
Yeah.
And we're just back to the same exact moral argument before.
We are. He says if there is no justice or injustice in the universe, then how would a part of the universe, me, come to feel that it's unjust if it doesn't actually exist? He says, in order to claim that the universe is unjust, I have to have a standard by which I judge it. And the fact that I can see injustice in the universe shows me that atheism, he says, is just too simple. It doesn't work.
Right.
It doesn't work. It doesn't explain things.
Yeah.
He says, just a couple more quotes. If the world has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning.
If the world has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning.
Yeah. It's a really good point. But if there is real justice and injustice, there must be a standard by which we are judging the world, and we're right back where we started,
Yeah.
a moral lawgiver.
Yeah, the just and unjust question that we're talking about is just another version of the moral law
That's all it is.
thing.
Yeah. That's chapter 1.
Yeah, chapter 2 is called the invasion. What do we mean by the invasion?
Well, he's going to talk about Christianity and dualism first, and then get into what has come into this world.
Right.
Right. So He begins by saying the universe is obviously bad in some ways, but it also contains creatures who know that it's bad. So there's only two options: Christianity and dualism. Christianity teaches the world was good and has now gone wrong. Dualism teaches there are two equal powers, equal being the key here,
Yes.
good and evil, and they fight each other.
Yes. This gets at some of the stuff that was intimated about goodness, evil, right, wrong, and where those standards actually claim what they claim.
Is Star Wars dualism in the sense that
Totally. It's yin and yang, dualistic,
right?
new agey.
I mean, they're equal powers.
Absolutely.
Which one you lean into?
Now, I've just probably offended some Star Wars nerds.
I brought it up. Very sorry. I'm just asking a question.
We've probably offended some Star Wars people, but that you want the good to be the explanation for what goes on in the story may be your problem for how you interpret the story
Okay.
of Star Wars.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know just enough about Star Wars to say, hold on a second.
Yeah.
No, I can probably be proven wrong 20 different ways from people who know the actual stories better than I do. But
Yeah. So dualism again teaches there are two equal powers, good and evil, and they fight against each other in the universe. But the only way, he says, we can call one good and the other evil, think about it, is by using something outside of them, a standard, a third thing by which they are measured.
yes. That's the Force, by the way.
That's the Force. So he said, I've always remembered since I read this, when Lewis said this, talking about evil versus good and what comes first and what is primary.
Right.
It was really helpful for me. An eternally evil power would have to love evil for its own sake. But that's not what we see. People love evil for another reason.
Yes.
It brings them pleasure or they find it useful. It's not because I just love evil. I love the pleasure of inflicting pain on someone else and getting vengeance.
Yes. And the pursuit of pleasure,
right,
is not evil.
That's right. Yeah. So where he's going with this is badness is spoiled goodness. It's not original.
Yes.
So he says you can be good simply for the mere sake of goodness. It's the right thing to do. But you cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness. You desire something else, to hurt, to punish, to get even, to make someone suffer. No one is cruel simply because cruelty is wrong. They are cruel because it's pleasant or useful to their purposes.
And often would do so because they think it just.
Sure.
They are becoming a law unto themselves in that sense. Yes, this isn't at all original with Lewis.
No.
Evil is a privation or a lessening or a perversion of the good.
Right. The good comes first.
The good comes first. Has been the Christian story all along.
That's right. And he points this out. He says, where good does not exist, evil cannot exist. So, for example, pleasure, money, power, safety, those are all good things in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. But they become bad when they are pursued, he says, by the wrong method, in the wrong way, or too much, or as a god in and of itself.
That's right.
So if I pursue pleasure for pleasure, just because of pleasure, I end up hurting people. If I pursue money, I end up being greedy. If I pursue power, I end up being cruel. In other words, they become bad even though they were originally something good. So dualism in and of itself as two equal powers, good and evil, that doesn't actually work, because bad is only seen to be bad when something that was original and good becomes perverted.
Right.
Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a helpful concept.
It's radically important, actually, because the explanatory power of the scriptures saying created in the garden in this way and good is the thing, right? That's what made creation. That's what made us. It was an expression of who God is, not God himself.
Yeah.
So as the distinction between creator and creature is fundamentally important with all that. But then, of course, what happens is the fall, and that's where we live now.
Yeah.
And the fall is the perversion, the upside downness, the privation, the lessening of the goodness.
Yeah.
So, without getting into a whole bunch of, well, isn't the serpent in the garden, and where does evil come from, and who, and all that, right?
I know.
We're talking about the difference between Christianity and dualism at this point.
Yeah.
So, a dualism doesn't say anything in the end about what good really actually is in a way that we would say is good as humans experiencing the moral law, right? It wouldn't actually have anything to say about what good is, and at the same exact token, what evil is, if they're equal in terms of their power.
Yeah.
So it's actually a radically important thing to say that evil is not in and of itself
Original.
Exactly. It comes from the undoing of good.
Yeah, it's parasitic. Here's an extreme example. Think of rape. Rape is a horrible thing, right? Well, rape may be motivated by several things that are good. Pleasure, intimacy, connection, human relationship.
Trying to get justice for one's hurts in the past that have nothing to literally do with this person or this circumstance.
So,
and can also have those things.
Yeah.
As well.
My point being, each of those fundamental things that's being sought for in and of themselves comes first and is good, but they've been pursued in the wrong way.
Which is absolutely true about all kinds of examples we could give.
Right.
All of them.
So what we would say to the person who struggles with a particular sin, we would say, I don't deny your need for this, your desire for this, but there's a right and a wrong way to go about it. And here's the way God has designed in a way that fulfills you, pleases him, and is good for others. Like we don't say your desire itself is wrong. It's the good that's been perverted.
Right.
And we help you recognize that and then work toward good.
And that your understanding of that is not right.
Right.
It's wrong. It's perverted. It's messed up. And that's how you got to that place.
Right.
And you did that thing. Which is to say, the privation, the undoing, the perversion of the goodness can be evil in a whole bunch of terrible ways, like that example that we would describe as, oh, it's just nothing but evil. Well, I understand, and I don't disagree with the spirit of what you're saying. It is rape, bad, wrong, evil. We would all say 100%.
Yeah, of course.
No question. The desires that are in the human heart that become behaviors are not wrong in and of themselves.
Right.
It's how you feed those, express those.
Right.
So,
yeah,
yes, I think the answer to your question is yes. I think you've said all that correctly, and I think it's true.
Okay. So his point here is then dualism doesn't work because evil is not an independent power that exists alongside good in the same way. It's parasitic to it. It comes after it. It perverts it.
Which is to say, I think dualism describes it at some level because you look around and you go, well, both are happening.
Right.
Right? Like that religious philosophy came out of people looking at the world and themselves and saying, well, good and evil. I see both in every one.
Which we agree. You do.
Sure. Christianity goes underneath.
That's right.
And beyond that.
What came first.
Right. To say more.
And again, all this getting back to a moral lawgiver. So we would say evil is good that has been corrupted. Well, Lewis said that. But evil is good that has been corrupted. He says the universe is a battlefield, good and evil. But it is a war of rebellion, not a war between equals. Good and evil are not equal. Evil is in rebellion against the good.
That's right.
And he says one day the rightful king came and will come and call us to take part in a great campaign in enemy-occupied territory. So this is what he's explaining Jesus did. Mm-hmm. This is who we are, and one day that rightful king will return. And for 2 Thessalonians 1, 7 through 9, if you've ever struggled as a Christian as to why does God not come and right the wrongs and establish in power good for all time and deal justly, that will happen. And the scriptures are clear about it.
In a very definitionally important sense. It's already happened,
Yes.
and yet it hasn't entirely fully, the implications of the already happened parts have not yet taken over the rest of the world. And that doesn't happen until the return of Jesus.
Right. And so do you mind reading
Yeah,
what that return of Jesus will be like?
Yep, 2 Thessalonians, 1st chapter, 7 through 9. Say, when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus, they will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction, away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might.
Those are powerful words. Sober words.
Yeah.
Don't bring that up to minimize those who may receive the judgment of God. Bring it up to point out to the fact that God is the original good moral lawgiver, is eternally and perfectly just, cares about evil, and has promised to one day do something completely just about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to leave that with him.
Yeah, and he's writing to people there who are wanting relief.
Yeah, they're suffering.
Yes.
They're suffering for being followers of Jesus Christ.
Because they and we live in enemy territory in the sense that you spoke about reading from Lewis, where sin is doing its thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all suffering the consequences of that. And we can see that not just in ourselves, but in unbelievers as well. So,
Chapter 3?
chapter 3.
All right, so chapter 3 begins with a good question. So if a good God created a good world, which we've been arguing, then how did evil enter it? If dualism is not the answer, how did evil enter it? And the answer Lewis will give is that God gave some of his creatures the gift of free will.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a quote from Lewis. The happiness which God designs for his higher creatures, humans, in his image, is the happiness of being freely, voluntarily united to him and to each other in an ecstasy of love and delight, and for that, they must be free. The point he's making is that we have choices to make.
Yes.
And having what he calls a free will makes evil possible because you are choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, when we go back to the garden, we see this exactly the way God designed us.
Sure. And to go back to the idea that desires and ambitions are at the root of the morality of a thing, and that evil's a lessening or perversion of the good. The desires for good things, qualifier, the desires for good things means that, as I will probably say a few times, free will is not the ability to do something when I could have done something else, though I agree that it is that. I think it's more than that, and that the explanatory power of I could have done otherwise is not what I chose to do the thing I want. So free will does make evil possible in the sense that Lewis is saying. Yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean what everybody means by free will typically today in a libertarian free will sense. It can include that, but it doesn't only mean that. So, yeah, a free will makes evil possible. Free will means we have the ability to choose out of our desire, and we always do.
Yes.
And that's why I say the explanatory power is in the not definition and not just the otherwise could have definition.
Yeah, Scott and I have talked about this. If you're interested to know, we'll get to this. Where did I put this? The episodes 33, 34, and 35 of BB&B. We talk about God's sovereignty, human will, election, salvation. We talk about this in depth. And one of the things we say, which we'll just repeat here because it's helpful, it's what Scott is saying, and I'm going to say it in a different way, but the same thing, is how we define free will is critical to this. It is not the ability to weigh all options neutrally and from a place of complete objectivity make a decision. Free will is the ability to choose what we desire, to choose what we want. But the point we're going to make is because of Adam's sin, what we desire is broken.
Our wanter of goodness is broken.
Right. The core from which we desire things is now corrupted. So, yes, you choose what you want. I choose what I want. Unfortunately, what I want is tainted by evil, and I am bent toward evil. So I just think we both agree that that's an important definition.
Yeah, and I would say that goes even back to what we were talking about previously in the book about our understanding of good and evil, of right and wrong, comes often from an experience of our wrongness,
Yeah.
perhaps primarily.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll just state it this way to summarize. When God created human beings, he gave them the capacity to choose between right and wrong. We see that. God told Adam to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve chose to disobey God,
Right.
and they ate of the tree. New Testament makes clear because of Adam's choice, each of us is then bent toward evil. Romans 5:12,
Yep.
Romans 3,
Yep.
Genesis 6:5.
If you are a serious Bible nerd and you're like, I'm not sure about that Romans 5 stuff, look up the article by S. Lewis Johnson. I think it's called Romans 5:12, an exercise, Romans 5:12, an exercise in exegesis and something else. It is fantastic on giving the biblical stuff underneath what we're saying with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, Romans 5:12, Romans 3:10 through 18, and Genesis 6:5, just a few examples
Yeah.
where because of Adam, we now have a bent toward evil. That is why we have this moral law compelling us, but we still do otherwise. Romans 7:18. I don't obey, though I know I ought to obey.
Yep, I was just thinking that a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just to clarify this idea of free will a little bit more, give an example. When we say it's the ability to choose what we desire or we want, every choice we ever make is ultimately determined by what we value most. It always is. So when we choose unpleasant things, you think, well, no, I'm not choosing what I want there. I'm choosing to do something I'd rather not do. But think of why you are choosing to do that. There is still some reason you are choosing to do it. A child obeys their parent out of fear of punishment. They value avoiding pain in discipline higher than actually choosing to disobey. They're still choosing what they want. What they want happens to be getting out of discipline, avoiding pain.
Sure, and I can choose things that I do not, in a sense, I would say I do not want to do this thing.
Sure.
It's going to be hard or difficult or painful or will mean whatever that I don't, don't want to do. However, if I want to do the thing that I believe is good and right because it honors God, I have nonetheless chosen that thing that's hard out of my desire.
It's still what you value most.
And I valued that more than the avoidance of the hard part.
Yeah. Yeah. So just be careful with the word free. I think
Yes.
that's it. The clarification we want to make is that the word free is not always helpful when we talk about will, volition. Because
And will is a volition.
it is.
It's a direction of desires. It's not just a theoretical plan. It's the way that plan works out based on our
Right.
ability to act.
Right.
Right? That's what volition
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. It's so two clarifications. The term free implies two things that are not true. Number one, it implies that mankind is morally neutral and can objectively weigh all options and make an unbiased decision. That's not how it works.
Yes, all available options.
Right, as
And,
if
and
we
not
have
even like
all
all
knowledge.
unavailable. Right,
Right.
right. Well, we talk about it in those terms.
Right. And as if we could see all the implications of every decision we could ever make.
Right.
I mean, you think about it, it becomes silly that we're not morally neutral and we can't objectively weigh all options.
Right.
Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things, desperately sick. Jesus said, Matthew 15:19, out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. No. We are not morally neutral, and we do not objectively weigh all facts. We cannot do so. And number two, the second thing that the word free implies that is not true is that we can choose, we can do whatever we choose, and we are not restrained in the application of our will in any way. No, that's God. God is the only ultimate sovereign who is truly free. He alone makes decisions that no one can withstand.
Yes.
We have a will,
Yes.
but it is subordinate to God's will.
And it is broken.
Yes.
And what we mean by subordinate to God's will is also that.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I talk about this. We sometimes in ministry see people choose evil, and we think, it seems like their desire to choose evil is above God's sovereign ability to suppress evil and change them. And then we think, no, that's a lie. That's a lie. If God permits you to choose evil, he is doing so for a good reason, but you are not contravening his will. You are not somehow usurping him and going over his authority. He's allowing you to follow that line of thinking and application where it leads.
Yes.
Because he has a good purpose for it.
Yes.
But you are fully in his control at all times.
His good purpose may not be seen now.
Right.
And it may not be fully revealed until the consummation of all creation.
That's right. You may
and
never know.
And his glory is made known in a bunch of ways. But if you are going to be condemned eternally and apart from him, you will not see those good, higher, long-term, God-glorifying goals. And I won't complicate it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the verse in James 4:14 and 15, where he explains this. He says, you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes.
Vapor, dust, ashes, wind.
Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. So these two ideas that sometimes confuse us with free will. We are not morally neutral and have the ability to objectively weigh all facts from an unbiased standpoint. No. We are steeped in sin and bent toward evil. Number two, we are not ultimately free. God alone is ultimately free. We are subordinate to him. He permits and allows things to happen for good reasons according to his wisdom, even when sometimes we choose sin. But we are not usurping God's authority. Only he alone is free.
Right. And the classical Protestant Reformation and beyond idea, whether Calvinist or Arminian, is that when people are choosing evil, God has been restraining evil in the world.
That's clear in Scripture.
Yes. So that's already in operation.
Already.
So some of that restraint is let go.
Right.
As those choices are happening. And so God, as a secondary cause as opposed to a primary cause, is allowing those kinds of things in those kinds of ways.
For good reasons.
Even under his ultimate sovereign will that we don't always yet see.
Yeah.
So there's much more behind all that.
There is.
But those who are like, well, doesn't that make God responsible? It depends on how you're talking about it and what you mean and how you explain those things. Yeah. So just for what it's worth.
Yeah, and this idea of God suppressing evil, we're not aware of this. It happens all the time. You see it in Scripture. God said in the Old Testament, was it Abraham who went and said, Sarah's my sister?
Sure.
And
twice.
Is it Abimelech or whatever? And God said to Abimelech, I prevented you from touching her.
Yes.
I restrained evil. I suppressed evil. I didn't let you touch this woman who is another man's wife, though you did not know. Like God suppresses evil all the time.
Sure.
Lest we think he never does. But for his purposes, which are always good, when we see evil happen, it is under the will of God in ways we don't fully understand. But it is never because we have the authority to override or trump God. Ever, 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 ever. So, I don't know, Scott, if you want to stop at this point. There's more to this. Okay. Where we're going to go with this is this idea that God does let us make real choices. It is worth the risk because it also makes love possible. Love being that which is for the good of another. And those are real choices humans make. So we'll talk more about this and understanding where does this bent toward evil come from. But unless you want to wrap it up a different way, I think probably stop here.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.